Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Simply Bitcoin IRL. Today, we have a very special guest. We have Fred Krueger. But before we bring him up on stage, I do want to give a shout out to the Bitcoin company that makes this show possible. Of course, I'm talking about Bitcoin Well. It's the best place to build your Bitcoin stack. Help us make self-custody by default the standard in the US, only brought to you by Bitcoin Well. That's right. It's the first Bitcoin only on-ramp in the United States of America that is self-custody by default. That's right. You can't buy Bitcoin on Bitcoin Well unless you take self-custody, and that perfectly aligns with the Simply Bitcoin ethos. So what are you waiting for? Visit bitcoinwell.com today. All right, ladies and gentlemen, no more delay. I do want to bring Fred up on stage. Fred, you have quite a very impressive CV. You have a bachelor's from Cornell University in mathematics, and you have a PhD from Stanford in operations research and statistics. So that's quite impressive. How are you? And first of all, not only how are you, very, very great stuff and content that you're dropping on Twitter. Very, very valuable. Your account grew extremely quickly, which is not that hard. It's not that easy to do. So obviously people are finding value in your work and what you're contributing to the community.
Oh, thanks a lot, Nico. I appreciate it. Yeah.
So this has been a wild ride. You were not on my radar for a while. Were you looking at Bitcoin Twitter? When did you decide to jump into the fray, so to speak?
Well, okay. So I've been in Bitcoin for quite some time, and I've been in crypto before Bitcoin even for longer, right? But I really haven't seen any kind of need to be on Bitcoin Twitter per se. Until I think it was December 1st of last year, so about 2.5 months ago, 3 months ago, right? So December, January, February, 3 months ago. So 90 days I've been on Bitcoin Twitter. That's it. And the only reason I decided to get on Bitcoin Twitter is that I kind of felt like I had a unique point of view about this, Bitcoin ETF that kind of needed to be kind of said. And so I sort of hopped on really just to talk about the Bitcoin ETF. That was the only thing I was sort of interested in talking about. Now I've sort of talked a little bit about a few other things, but I'm still mainly interested in kind of this ETF story and how it's going to, really accelerate the price adoption of Bitcoin, the adoption of Bitcoin as a savings tool. Does that make sense?
Yes, it absolutely makes sense. But let's talk about that, right? So for our audience, it definitely accentuates. And again, from my perspective, right, Fred, I'm the 1/3 of my life has been in Bitcoin, right? It's is 8th year. I'm 30 years old, basically 30 years old, literally 1/3 of my life. This is my career. This is what I know. So, when I've ever had Foss or Lavish or Lepard, I always say the same thing.
Yeah.
They're incredible guys, incredibly smart. I always tell them the same thing. Caitlin Long, I always tell them the same thing. I'm like, look, I learned Bitcoin first, and then I learned traditional finance second, right? So like looking backwards. And
yes, I'm the opposite. I started and I've sort of there's sort of three parts to me, right? Part of me is a tech person, right? So I have a PhD, and really kind of three subjects, but it was this way. I had Donald Knuth from computer science. I don't know if you've ever done any sort of theoretical computer science, but you probably run across the book, The Art of Computer Programming. That was Donald Knuth, who was on my thesis advisor, and then Tom Cover in the stats department, and Curtis Eves in the operations research department. So, I did a thesis in that. It was just pure math, right? I just say it's pure math because it is. It was just, pretty hardcore math. Then I went to work on Wall Street, and, I was on Wall Street for 6 years as a prop trader at Salomon Brothers. And that's a long time, by the way, like spending 6 years kind of managing prop money on an arbitrage desk, that'll burn you out pretty quick.
I can imagine that in that type of environment. So, you have this very impressive background, right? Educational, academic background.
Then I spent 10 years or 20 years in tech, and I'm probably the most serial entrepreneur you'll ever meet, in that I've have over 10 exits, and out completely non-crypto related, right? And I've all these exits are, me at the company, and an exit for me is something where you sell for more than $10 million, right? And my total kind of exit is $500 million. So I've sold $500 million worth of companies, and you can obviously I had some investors and VCs and so on in this, but I made a lot of money in finance. I've made a lot of money in tech, and now I've made a lot of money in crypto, right? So that's kind of my background. So I'm in a position where I can kind of look at stuff, and I saw some stuff that other people didn't see. People like James Lavish, who I like James's content a lot, right? And Greg Foss. They're more focused on sort of the economic, sort of like the U.S. debt situation is sort of unsustainable, right? That's their thing. I'm not so much of a macro type guy. It's not to say that I don't like their stuff, but I just don't find it very useful for trading, to focus on those things. But the one thing I did focus on immediately was this ETF, right? And I was just like, when I saw this ETF come out, I was just sort of like, why isn't everybody just screaming about this thing? Because this is by far the biggest thing I've ever seen in Bitcoin, right? And I just started saying, guys, like, you don't understand. Like, everything else you're saying doesn't matter. This is 10x whatever you're talking about, right? So and I've sort of ruffled a few feathers along the way, because some people have been like, well, Fred, it's not that interesting. There's other more interesting things like Nost or I don't know, Fediment or things like that, whatever. And my point is, look, those are interesting intellectual ideas, but they have about that much. They're going to have that much of an impact on the price of Bitcoin. And this ETF, when it happens, I said this in December. I said, just mark my words. This is the main event that you guys are going to see, right? And then the ETF came out, and it looked like a failure to some people initially, right? In the month of January, it looked kind of negative, right? Like GBTC was selling, and then the other ones were barely keeping up with GBTC selling. And if you wanted to say the glass was half empty, you could make the case the glass was half empty. But I kept on saying, I was like, this is crazy. I mean, like, this is going to be, this is unbelievable. Like, this amount of the amount of demand that we're seeing from Wall Street. And so I was very, very positive during that period. And I remain, just obviously massively bullish on this whole thing right now. And I just think you can't be bullish enough on these ETFs. It's just sort of like, it's math, it's finance, and it's just like, and it's finally we have a vehicle where people can invest in this stuff. That's it. That's the bottom line.
So, okay, it's the bottom line, and I'm glad that you gave me that background. Tech, Wall Street, academia, successful 10 exits, you said. And what got you interested is the ETFs, right? So, could you give a little bit of kind of like a crash course or a elevator pitch, so to speak, to our audience? Our audience is mostly, Bitcoiners, self-custody. That's the people who watch this show.
Right.
Why?
And me too. I'm a self-custody Bitcoiner, right? So.
Yeah. Why was the Bitcoin? What makes the Bitcoin ETF this major catalyst to take Bitcoin to the next level price wise, from your perspective?
Okay, so what drives Bitcoin price higher? It's new money coming into the ecosystem, right? And it's new people buying into sort of the idea virus that Bitcoin is a good place to save your money. But if you look back into 2017 timeframe, that cycle, or the 2021 cycle, it wasn't sort of mainstream people putting money into their 401ks that was buying into Bitcoin. Why? Because those people couldn't really invest very easily. They had to transfer money out. They had to put it into Coinbase, effectively really Coinbase in the US. And then they had to buy Bitcoin with that and hold it in Coinbase. Now, some of them did what you did and what I did, which is, self-custody your Bitcoin. You have to learn all about self-custody and all that. And it's a great thing. Look, self-custody is a fantastic thing, but it's a complicated thing. And in adoption of new technologies, any barrier that you put in front of people really, really will stop that spread, that adoption. So it's amazing to me that Bitcoin has gotten to where it has without something like the ETF. But now when you take the ETF, all of a sudden you have 100 million plus Americans who have money in their, Charles Schwab or Merrill Lynch. Merrill Lynch may not really a great example, but let's say Charles Schwab or Fidelity accounts, right? And with just a few clicks, you now have exposure to Bitcoin. And contrast that with the same person going to buy Bitcoin on Coinbase, much more difficult. And even more difficult, signing up for a, self-custody, single sig or multi-sig platform like Casa or Unchained. So it's really maybe 100 times less barriers to entry. And when you cut these barriers to entry down that much, and you've just tapped into effectively the largest capital market in the world, you don't have to be a genius to realize that that's just going to move the market just tremendously. And I think we're just in the very beginning of that right now.
Yeah. So, and let's talk about that, right? Because you've had, a couple tweets, in the recent past. One of the latest I'm reading is 1 billion a day in new demand should create 100 billion in new market cap daily. That's enough to move the price to 117K in 10 trading sessions. So what did you mean by that?
Well, okay, so there's this concept that that people refer to as the multiplier effect, right? So what that is let's just say there's $1 billion that comes into the Bitcoin market over a period of time, relatively short period of time. How much does that move the price by? Well, it doesn't move the price. It doesn't move the market cap up exactly 1 billion, because it's not like people are just saying, oh, I'll just calmly sell you the exact 1 billion at current price. No, you're going to have to get that Bitcoin from somebody, right? And there's not an infinite amount of Bitcoin that's on these exchanges. There's about 1.8 million Bitcoin that's sitting on all of the exchanges. And all of that is not even for sale, right? So you're looking at, hundreds of thousands of coins that are really kind of actively for sale at any point in time. And if you look at sort of 10,000 Bitcoin a day or more, which is kind of where the demand is right now from these funds, this thing can literally eat through the entire supply of Bitcoin on all the exchanges in a matter of like 100 days at this rate. So to use that exact analogy, you have $1 billion coming in a day, right? That's Adam Back just posted this thing, which he's right. There's been about $1 billion a day of kind of raw demand from Wall Street coming in, but then there's been these liquidations of GBTC from these bankruptcies, right? Like FTX and Genesis in particular, right? And so there's been still a lot of selling. So it's still muted relative to what it's going to be in, say, a month, once we've worked through all those numbers. And if you look at $1 billion coming in, that has the impact of raising the market cap of Bitcoin by $100 billion. So it's a 100x multiplier. Bank of America has estimated that this multiplier is 118. Other people have said it may be even as high as 200, but let's just say it's 100, right? Well, that means you're going to increase the market cap by $100 billion. Well, the entire market cap of Bitcoin is $1.3 trillion right now. So that's a 7% increase in one day, right? So you do that for 10 days and you're going to double the effectively, or 10 trading sessions, you more or less double the price of Bitcoin.
Gotcha.
So it's pretty amazing.
So, and okay. And
quite double. I mean, you move it from 67 to 100,000, 110,000, whatever the number is.
Gotcha. So, and let's talk about that for a sec. So, like, because I think a lot of people, I think they misunderestimated how much the ETF was going to influence it, right? Never in Bitcoin's history have we hit an all-time high before the halving, right? That's never happened before. You're basically saying that there's all this capital kind of waiting on the sidelines. BlackRock is a fan. Fidelity is a fan. BlackRock's holdings are about to surpass Michael Saylor's holdings. They're very, very close. I think last time I checked, BlackRock had 183,000 Bitcoin. Michael Saylor has 193,000.
Tomorrow they will increase.
They will surpass it. Yeah. So where do we go from here? Where do you see Bitcoin at the end of the year? What's going to happen? And not to mention, I kind of want to talk about the supply shock a little bit, right? So the halving is right around the corner. Last time I was checking the figures, there's estimated to be about 10,000 Bitcoin being bought on the market every single day. Only 900 are being mined. In about a month or so, month and change, it's going to be 450 Bitcoin being mined. Right. So this is, I don't think anything like this has ever happened before in the history of financial markets. Would it be correct to say something like that?
No, honestly, you're going to underestimate the impact. You can say all those things and you're still underestimating it, right? Because there's so many other things that are going. So the only thing you potentially are overestimating is the impact of the halving, right? Because the halving is, as you said, what is the impact? The impact right now is, well, we know right now and for the rest of the next 4 years is going to be 450 Bitcoin per day, right? Well, right now the demand for Wall Street is 10,000 Bitcoin per day. So it's 20 times the halving, right? Now, as Bitcoin price goes up, it won't be 20 times as halving. Let's say Bitcoin price doubles. Well, then it'll still be 10 times the halving. It's still just an enormous number, right? It'll just an enormous number. Even if Bitcoin quadruples, we're still going to be 5 times the impact of the halving. So I just actually don't think the halving is going to make any difference at all at this point relative to what we're seeing, these flows from these ETFs. They're just so much bigger than anybody ever thought. So I don't think the halving is that much of a big deal. And I actually don't think it's going to be a big deal from here on out. So I think we've seen the last of the cycles. I think it's over.
So you don't believe 2026 comes around, we're going to have that 80% drop. That's done and dusted because of the ETFs.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be a 2026 1 year drop kind of like that. I think that's over. That narrative is over. It doesn't mean that we won't potentially see a big drop some point, right? But I don't think it's going to be confined to a year. I don't think you can pinpoint it at exactly this happening, because I just don't think the halvings are going to be that important in the future. It's not to say that we can't have a bear market for Bitcoin. I do think we could absolutely have a bear market for Bitcoin, because every single financial asset that has been known to man so far has had bear markets, whether it's the US stock market, the Japanese stock market, the bond market. Every asset class has bear markets, and they all get ahead of themselves, and they all crash, and then they can recover. But something like the NASDAQ crash in 2000 where it took till basically 2010 to really come back. It took a decade to get back to NASDAQ 5,000. That would not surprise me down the road with Bitcoin. I think we're so far away from that point where that would happen. It may happen once we get to 1 million Bitcoin and we have a crash, and we go from 1 million to 300,000, and it takes 5 years to get back to 1 million, for example, right? I see that as a possibility. I just don't think this regularity with the cycles is going to continue much beyond. I think that's my opinion.
Interesting. Okay. So no more cycles. The ETF, played a big role in this. And then there's this other theory that's being kind of talked about a little bit, which is this idea of kind of this left shifted bull run top in 2024. I think a lot of people, if the cycle theory is dead, are anticipating, a cycle top in 2025. You're making the case that, that theory is basically dead. So are you seeing a potential top in 2024?
No, not at all.
Okay.
No, I think we're on the beginning part. I mean, this is just, pure speculation as a trader. But my view is, look, I think we are on the beginning part of quite a big bull run in Bitcoin. And, I would, an analogous thing would be like the price of Facebook from the Facebook IPO till now, right? We've had this huge, I think it'll outperform that, but I'm just saying, I think we're on the verge of something quite big and quite long. And I do think we may have some bear markets in Bitcoin, and they could be also big and long. But I think think of this as sort of the IPO of Bitcoin. This is like Bitcoin finally coming to the financial markets. And, it's rare that a company IPOs, does great, and then tanks a year later. That's usually not what happens. If they do really well, they usually continue, and they continue to do well for a decade. And that's kind of what I think for Bitcoin. I think it's going to be a great decade for Bitcoin, or at least a great 5 years for Bitcoin, great 5-6 years. And, I think we're at a very relatively low price of Bitcoin relative to where I think it's going to go. So I think it's got a lot of room to the future, to upside. And I think people should not be looking to sell Bitcoin at all right now. This is not something that you shouldn't be looking to trade it. You shouldn't be looking to sell it. You should absolutely, if you don't have it, you should be looking to buy it right now, right here. But I think, for you, for me, for most of the people listening to your podcast, I would say there's nothing to do at all in 2024, period. Nothing. Or 2025. I would just, you just hang tight, entertain yourself with crypto Twitter, but there's no trading of this thing right now. This is something that we are seeing. This is really the catalyst you've been waiting for your entire Bitcoin life, right here. Right here. It doesn't get it, and there's not going to be a next one. This is it. This is the main event right now, right? BlackRock doesn't get any bigger than BlackRock, right? BlackRock's the largest asset manager on the planet. There's nothing bigger than BlackRock. This is the ultimate boss in the video game.
Gotcha. Okay. So no more cycles. This is the catalyst. What would you say to people that feel they're late to the party? Is there still potential upside? There's this theory of diminishing returns. Do you still think that there is major opportunity here for, investors?
Yeah, I think if I had to put where we are relative to where we're going, I think we're on a road to going to 10 or 20 million dollars per Bitcoin, ultimately.
What's the timeline there?
Yeah, so I would say the timeline on that's a couple decades, right? A couple decades for us to get to those kind of prices. But, it wouldn't surprise me if we could get to 1 million within a decade, right? Now we
Gotcha.
didn't even get to 1 million in 2 years, right? But if you told me, Fred, you're going to have to hold your Bitcoin for a decade and you're going to get out at $1 million a coin, I'd say, wow, what's a decade? I'll wait a decade, no problem, And I'm a little older than you, so I've held assets for a decade, right? I've held gold bars for 3 decades, and they haven't done bad. They've gone up 10x in 3 decades, my gold. So I'm prepared to hold Bitcoin for a decade. It's not a problem. And if I think it's going to 1 million, I don't want to sell it at 300,000 or 200,000. I want to wait until it gets to 1 million. So
Okay.
I think that's sort of the intermediate target. The target that you really need to focus on is 1 million, right? I really think we're going to get to Bitcoin 1 million. I mean, I would say a 99% probability that we get there. How long does it take? I don't think it's going to take much more than 10 years to get there. So I think that's an enormous opportunity from here with Bitcoin at, 67,000, right? I mean, nothing else is going to get you there. You buy a house. I don't know where you live. Where do you live, Nico? What general area of the universe do you live in?
Miami.
Miami. Okay. I don't think a Miami condo is going to go up, 10x in the space of a decade. It might go up 2x, right? But it's not going to go up 10x. So I think you have to look at it over, let's say, a decade from here. I think Bitcoin is going to be your best performing asset over the next decade. So if you buy it right here today. So you don't need to have owned it earlier. You don't need to have gotten it early. Right here is a great time to buy, in my opinion. And now the question is, how much of your net worth do you put in that, right? And I would say, I would do your own research and figure out, what you think and, relative to your comfort zone and stuff. But, I think that if you put 1%, that's not the right number, right? Because you don't have ideas you don't have 99 ideas that are equivalent to Bitcoin. At least I don't, right? You might maybe think Nvidia is going to be a great buy. Maybe you think Miami real estate is going to be a good buy. I don't know. But if I had to put a portfolio together and I'm going to put, 5% in Bitcoin and 95% in Miami real estate and energy stocks, I think there's something wrong with that portfolio construction. I mean, if I knew what Bitcoin was going to do, I would move those things around pretty much the exact opposite, So I just think that people are underinvested in this asset. And, you can't talk people into getting to what they have outside of their comfort zone. But, I do think that the more you own, the better of this thing. And especially if you're young, somebody your age should own, I would say the majority of their net worth should be in Bitcoin, in my opinion. If I was your age, I'd pretty much be 100% in Bitcoin. And you probably are 100% in Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean, I've been 100% for 8 years now.
There you go.
So yeah.
All I'm saying is I agree with your allocation, right? So that's what I would have done. Now when you get to be my age, you're like, you've got more dependencies, and you don't need to grow the money that much, right?
Yeah.
So, it's all a personal thing, but I still think that when I see people talking about 10% allocation, I'm like, okay, 10% is okay if you absolutely don't understand Bitcoin. But if you understand Bitcoin, why would you be doing 10% of your portfolio in Bitcoin?
Could you explain it real quick? Like, what do you mean? So, like, if someone told you, again, they didn't understand Bitcoin, they didn't come from your background, it's just like, I'm going to put 10% in it, and and then you'd be like, okay, but you don't understand Bitcoin. They'd say, okay, explain it to me, pitch it to me. Why should I put more than 10%?
Well, it's just it's what do you believe? What do you think is the expected return, right? And so if you're sitting there and you go, okay, great, do you think Bitcoin can 10x over the next decade? And you're like, yeah, I do. Great. Well, do you think ExxonMobil can 10x over the next decade? Well, I think it can double. Okay, well, then you should be probably owning 0% of ExxonMobil and 100% in Bitcoin. Now, if you're not really sure about the Bitcoin and you really want additional diversification, okay, maybe I could see going, 70% in Bitcoin and 20% or 30% in ExxonMobil, just if you had those two choices, right? But it's just mathematically you're making a mistake if you're trying to if your number one goal is diversification as opposed to concentration in the positions that you believe in. Now, I wouldn't recommend doing this unless you completely believe in Bitcoin. But if you do believe in Bitcoin, I would say you should put your money where your mouth is. That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
And which you have done, right? Which you have done. You're not taking your money out and you're not buying. I mean, do you own any S&P 500?
Why would I?
There you go, right? So why would you? Good point, right? No, I'll tell you one reason you would is maybe you're wrong, right? Maybe you're wrong. Maybe Bitcoin isn't going to go up, or maybe it's going to go down, and maybe you're going to need the money for something else. You're going to get hit by a car, and you're going to need to pay for some life or death thing. So that's a good reason why not.
Yeah,
right?
but I could sell Bitcoin to do that, right? But
except you might be selling Bitcoin potentially at the exact wrong time. Right.
Yeah, I know, but my entry was what, $600-700, but I think I got maybe some at 500. Like,
Right.
sell a little bit is okay, right? But I guess what I'm trying to say is, yeah, fine. It's the best investment return, but the way that I see it is really is freedom. So if I own S&P, if I own stocks and all that stuff, and again, it's not that I'm a hater of stocks. Is being a Bitcoiner, I don't really feel like I actually own them, right? Like unless I have like these like certificates printed out in my home, in my drawer, of which it's not liquid. You're gonna send them back to the brokerage, and then they have to process them. That's gonna take like 2 weeks in order for me to sell those immediately. Not to mention the fact that I can't send them instantaneously anywhere around the world.
That's not the way. Okay, so that's the way they worked in 1870. Okay. Like, I mean, you're thinking like Cornelius Vanderbilt, right? Literally, he had these like stock certificates.
No. But the reason I brought it up that way is because like that would be like if I have stocks, on my Robinhood account or my Charles Schwab account, those aren't in my possession. A broker's holding that for me. A custodian is holding that for me.
And that brings us back to the ETF, right?
Yeah.
Because a Bitcoin ETF is exactly that, right?
Yeah.
Effectively, your Bitcoin is being held by Coinbase in the name of BlackRock, in the name of their fund. And so you have this intermediary between you and your Bitcoin, right? So you don't have access to the Bitcoin. And furthermore, you can't actually get the actual Bitcoin out of that. You can get the dollars, which you can then use to buy the Bitcoin, but it's not actually the same as owning the Bitcoin, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Now, what I would argue is at the end of the day, what do you care? Because if the Bitcoin really goes up and you can sell it and you have reasonable conviction that they're going to do a good job custodying your Bitcoin, you don't really care. Now, if the entire system goes to hell in a handbasket, right? And we become, this ends up becoming like Blade Runner, right? Where you're going to be walking around the streets of Los Angeles, with a ledger on your neck, right? and you're basically going to go buy gasoline by, sending funds through your Samurai wallet to somebody else, well, okay, then you kind of want to have the Bitcoin. But in the other scenario, right, where the world looks a lot more like the world today, except there are people who have the Bitcoin and there are people who don't, I don't think you care, right? So, and for most people, they're just not going to go this route of self-custody. They're just not. They won't do it, right?
Yeah.
So,
And by the way, I completely agree with you, because I see that with my parents, for example. There is definitely they take self-custody and multi-sig, kind of set up like collaborative custody with all the different services on chain, Casa, blah, blah, blah. So there's good ways to do it, but I'm the de facto IT guy, basically.
Well, they got their son, okay, who happens to be A, in Bitcoin, B, technical, right? And they can call it at any 10 minutes.
I'm the IT guy.
Don't have a guy like you that they can help get advice on this stuff. And they just don't have the time to learn about this stuff, right? They're not going to do it.
And I agree with you, so I agree with you, by the way, but just to play devil's advocate for the sake of the conversation, what about the infamous 6102 order? That's like one of the talking points from the Bitcoiners. Are like, oh, they've done this in the past. They've just seized the money. And, there's this honeypot. And the reason that they were able to get away with the 6102 order is because of the centralization of the custody of gold, right? So that's one of and then, of course, like, look at the predicament that the U.S. government is currently in. They're clearly on an unsustainable fiscal path, something that Jerome Powell even himself has admitted. So, like, you're looking at that, you're like, I don't know if, I trust, BlackRock and Coinbase to custody my Bitcoin. Like, if you have faith in, in the political situation in the United States, then perhaps. But my generation, the millennial generation, we lived through the 2008 financial crisis, right? They bailed out Wall Street. They effed Main Street. I just don't trust, the federal government. I don't trust the banks.
We all lived through that period, right? You might have been a little bit more young and impressionable when that happened, but we all lived through it, right? And I think, look, I don't think there's a risk, but at the same time, I can see other benefits to self-custody, right? I can see a benefit of, let's just say I wanted to pack up and move to Iceland, right? It's a lot easier to have the Bitcoin just with you in some wallet and go to Iceland than it is to wire money in the bank, to convert it to dollars and then wire the money to an Icelandic bank and all the rest, right? So there's a freedom element, and that's a big deal. That's probably not as much of a big deal for somebody living in America as it is somebody living, say, in Nigeria, right? If you're living in Nigeria, you absolutely do not trust the banks, right? The bank will 100% like rip you off. So I'm in favor of self-custody. Most people can't figure it out, and I'm not trying to argue that you shouldn't get into self-custody. I'm just saying it is going to be a fact that most people will not self-custody right now, because this is just a much easier way to go, right? And so, if you can do it, it's great. It has all kinds of advantages. It has some disadvantages too. You can lose your keys. You can screw up your self-custody. You can be not very good at OPSEC. You can get a key logger on your system. You can get SIM swapped. There's lots and lots and lots of reasons why, if you're not too careful, it can actually be a negative. So, I'm not trying to knock it for the, your generation, millennial Bitcoiners, but not everybody is a millennial Bitcoiner. Most people are, they're not going to go first of all, they're not going to go 100% Bitcoin. Number one, right? They're going to be, I want to bet maybe 5% Bitcoin. And if they're going to do 5% Bitcoin, they probably don't want to learn. They don't want to do all this stuff just for 5% of their portfolio. It's just too much work. So now that's just sort of the reality of it. And I think that because you're so immersed in this, that's where you have this blind spot about these ETFs, right? And that's why I think many Bitcoiners, many hardcore Bitcoiners and the voices of Bitcoin up until December of last year, they were sort of saying like, these ETFs are kind of not that great, whatever, blah, 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 poo poo. But you know, it's a blind spot. That's all I can tell you. It's a blind spot. And it's clearly a blind spot because right now, who's buying Bitcoin right now? These ETFs are buying about 80% of all the Bitcoin. That's where the buying is coming from. It's 80% is ETFs. It's not nowhere else.
Okay.
So that's the future. That's the future. I mean, whether you like it or not, you know, whether you choose to do self-custody or not, the bulk is buying through these ETFs. That's where and I think it's going to be so much more going forward.
I mean, the bulk of what they can get their hands on, right? Because 11 million Bitcoin are held already by individuals. You know, those the ETFs are going to have to convince those individuals to sell that Bitcoin.
They will.
I don't know about you, but I'm not selling, you know, I'm not like, what am I going to sell for? Like, it's like sell this out, something that has absolute scarcity for something for an unlimited.
The key word is not sell, it's spend. Right.
Okay.
So the key word is this. I mean, most Bitcoiners that I know who've kind of like you kind of amassed a stack by like being very careful and getting it early, and they're not big spenders right now, right? But I guarantee you at Bitcoin 1 million, you're going to start spending. You know, everybody does. Everybody who makes money wants to spend the money, you know, because you can't take it with you to the grave, right?
I mean, technically, okay, I'm going to be a kind of a pain in the ass here. Technically, you totally can take your Bitcoin with to the grave, though.
What are you going to do?
Throw away the seed.
Okay, that's a sailor saying, right? He's like, okay, I'm going to say, okay, great. I'm
nitpicking. I'm nitpicking.
Yeah, but that's sort of the ultimate stupidity, really. It's sort of like you're living life really poor. You're counting your score by how much Bitcoin you have, and then you die. And you don't spend any of it. Well, that's really stupid. Like, you know, like life is not finite. You know, you're doing this to enjoy more of it later. At some point, later is now, right? So, you know, for example, if I travel, I always stay in 5-star hotels. I always travel first class. Okay. Why? Because I have a lot of money. I don't care. I'm in the enjoyment phase of my money, right?
Of course.
So, and you will too, right? I mean, it's like every person I've seen who's made multiple millions of dollars, it changes your life, right? You buy a nice car, you buy a new house, you start traveling. Well, that's what you do, right? And you're going to do the same thing, and other Bitcoiners are going to do the same thing, and they will start spending more, right? It's not like they're going to sell it and necessarily put it in S&Ps or put it in the dollar in the savings bond, right? But they are going to start enjoying life a little bit more, right? And that's what I think is going to happen. And you will see a spending by all these people. And it's going to be very noticeable from a societal standpoint is the people with the really big houses and the flashy cars and everything, they're all going to be Bitcoiners, right? That's what's going to happen. And I think it's okay. I have no problem with it, right? It's like if you go to Palo Alto, right? Okay. Who was buying all the houses in Palo Alto? The guys who they were part of the Facebook IPO, right? Or part of the Google IPO before that, right? You know, so here in LA, you've got a bunch of Snap millionaires, right? So you've got this new money that comes in. That new money has kids, builds houses, does all this stuff with the new money, and kind of lives large at some point. Now they can wait a little bit before living quite large, but I get this idea of the people living on the mattress forever. I don't buy it. This, you know, I've just seen enough people make money, and people always want to spend money, and they all do. So
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that there's an element like, look, if you want to build wealth specifically at an early age, there's an element of delaying gratification. But
right.
I think that once you get to, once you get to a certain, without specifying any numbers, right?
Okay,
but once
10 years from now, Bitcoin's at $1 million. What do you do?
What do I do specifically?
Yeah, I mean,
I keep
not change any of your spending habits.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very happy, and I think that I live. I think the thing that makes the reason that I get up in the morning is I enjoy making content. That's what I like to do. But is it going to change my spending habits? I mean, is it going to change? You know what I value more than actual wealth, I would say is cash flow. I think cash flow is king. I think, net worth in terms of, it's just extremely painful. It's very painful to spend Bitcoin. Coming from a guy, okay, look, I bought Bitcoin at 500. Bitcoin's at $66,228. It's very painful for me to spend Bitcoin because of exactly the reason that you just said. I know for a fact this thing's gonna hit $1 million.
Okay,
right?
So at $1 million, you're gonna start feeling a little less painful.
Yeah, I mean, of course. I mean, you splurge a little bit here and there, I guess you could say, for sure, right? But I'm a bit of a hoarder. I'm not gonna lie. I'm a bit of a hoarder. I don't like spending my Bitcoin.
There's so many people. Look, even Warren Buffett, like he lived in.
I hope my wife does not listen to this podcast.
I'm telling her, okay, Mrs. Nico, you need to get a plan together, right? To start spending Nico's money. Okay. You need to start planning it, Mrs. Nico. He's going to be a very rich young Miamian, right? You're going to be a very rich, you're going to be right up there with Pitbull, right?
Oh my God.
You are. You're going to be, Mr. What do you call it? 405 till I die, or whatever that thing was.
305 till I die. Yeah. Okay.
Till I die, right. So, but look, your generation are going to be very rich. You really are. You're going to be very well off relative to the average dude in Miami who didn't buy Bitcoin. I mean, just think about it, right? You for whatever reason, you lucked into Bitcoin. Okay. For whatever, it's pure luck, I think. It's like, why did I get involved? Luck, I got orange pilled randomly by this guy, Tom Lee. Right. I think if I hadn't taken that trip, I went to Bermuda on this sort of crypto boondoggle to open a bank, right, in Bermuda, and they invited me out, and I, listened to Tom Lee and talk for 3 days, and I was just like, wow, yeah, I need to get serious with this Bitcoin. But had I not done that, I don't think I would have been orange pilled. So I don't know what orange pilled you. And maybe it's a show like this that'll orange pill you, It doesn't have to be in person. It can just be something that clicks. But I do think that, you're probably going to end up becoming quite a lot more wealthy than most of the people who didn't buy Bitcoin. It's that simple, right? It's sort of like taking that early job at Facebook or Google,
Yeah. It's definitely, I think Bitcoiners have a very humble kind of way of looking at this, and I think it's a topic that our community is just not used to kind of exploring. But for the sake of this conversation, I do believe that Bitcoiners in the next 10 years are going to be one of the wealthiest groups of people on the face of the planet. I mean, if you break down the numbers, right, 50 to 60 million millionaires all around the world, 21 million Bitcoin. If you have one Bitcoin, right, it's,
Yeah.
you know, it's 66K right now. If you have one Bitcoin, I truly believe you're going to be in an elite group of people that have the privilege to be able to own just one.
Yeah.
I really believe that. So I agree with your statement. And, you know, in terms of the wealth aspect, yeah, I think, you know, I think it's personality driven. And, you know, I think it kind of, you know, really the way that, what is it that you want out of life? Like, you know, my wife could probably have a different answer, but I love making content. You know, I'm a pretty simple guy. I've traveled I've been very privileged to travel the world in my youth because of my parents. And, you know, I know what I like to do, right? Which is make content. So as long as I'm making content and, you know, healthy, then that's what makes me happy. Right.
Well, the Bitcoin community it's a really interesting group of people, right? I mean, everything about Bitcoin is interesting, I think, because it's such an unusual thing, right? The fact that we have this piece of code, which was only 3,000 lines of code at the origin, right? And that 3,000 lines of code turned into this new monetary system without any CEO. It's insane, right? It's just an insane thing. So I do think it's, you know, it really is one of the most interesting thing I've seen, you know, from a new technology perspective, including the internet, right? You know, and I remember very much the world before the internet and after the internet, right? The internet was pretty much already baked and done by the time you were like in diapers, right?
Yep.
But you know, there are people like me who remember the world before an internet, and we remember also the world before cell phones, right? And so if I had to kind of handicap these things, I would say Bitcoin will make more of a difference. It'll make more of a difference than both cell phones and the internet. And I think those are the two big kind of, you know, tech innovations really that I've seen, you know, that have been present over the last 50 years, right? And this is going to be the biggest. This will be the biggest, and because really we've reinvented money, right? And there are some great side corollaries to that, because, you know, it's like you can hold your own money and you don't have to, you know, the government just can't take your money if you self-custody it, right? Not only the US government, but from whatever country you're in, right? So those are really good things, right? And I think, and that's, I think, why Bitcoin was invented, for that purpose, right? But I think the, you know, the side aspect of this, which is number go up, people get rich. You know, I'm from Wall Street, so I have no problem saying that's why I'm in Bitcoin. You know, personally, I'm not here to, you know, make Nigeria better off. Not that I don't care about Nigeria, but it's just I've never been to Nigeria. It's not on my mind. I don't know. I'm not here to make the world a better place. But I do think Bitcoin net is a positive for the world. But I think it's an incredible positive if you get in there early, which is why it works, right? So I think it's, you know, at the end of the day, you know, I'll be a little politically incorrect and say, yeah, I'm interested in number go up.
I don't think that's politically correct at all. I think that's, like, if we're being honest, I think that's the vast majority, you know,
well,
the saying.
I'm just trying to tell it like it is, right? And, you know, some people have said, oh, Fred's only interested in number go up. And I'm like,
Yeah.
just be honest, guys. I just want to be honest, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone's interested. I don't think this would work unless number go up. I think number go up is the thing, right? Like you know, I think it's Sailor said. I've said this many times too. Bitcoin is binary. If this thing does not go up, you know, it dies. Like, it either goes up forever or it dies. Like, that's maybe it's a simplistic way of.
a fish can't swim. If a fish doesn't swim, it dies, right?
Yeah.
If Bitcoin doesn't go up, it dies.
Yeah, I mean, I like, I agree. I came for, personally, right? I was 23 years old, 24. And I was a very kind of low point in my life, and I saw Bitcoin as, an opportunity. I came for the money, and then I ended up staying for the revolution, because you go down the rabbit hole and, kind of changes you. But again, right, from my, let's say, my parents' perspective, or my parents-in-law, I never forget. I was pitching. It wasn't my parents when I was. Now my parents are like fully orange pill, but I was pitching one of my parents. I think it was my mom.
I like somebody in the comments. Number go up is the gateway drug.
Yeah, there you go. So
there you go. That's exactly 100%. I agree with that.
No, but what they said was really interesting, because they said, and it was one of my mom's clients or something like that, and I was like pitching them, and I was like, I don't know, whatever, and he looks at me dead in the eye. He's like, Nico, I'm not interested in the revolution. I'm interested in the investment. And
right.
It was an older gentleman, made his fortune already, made his money. Doesn't really care. And then this kind of all circles back to the very beginning of the conversation, which is the ETFs, right?
Right.
And the case that you're making is that the ETFs are the mechanism of which, the older generation, which happens to have the lion's share of the world's wealth, is going to finally get exposure to the best asset class that has ever existed in the history of mankind.
They're going to get exposure. They're not necessarily going to go all in. They're just going to take a little exposure. They're going to get a little slice of it, right? So they're not going to benefit as much as you have, right? Where you got your Bitcoin super cheap, okay? But they're going to get exposure. They're going to get benefit, and moreover, they're going to be on the pro Bitcoin platform, right? So if they try to do 6102s, right? If we get 10 million people who own Bitcoin in America, they're not going to be a 6102. They won't, right? Because Fred's going to 100% going to sell. No. But you know what I'm saying? Like you need to get a fair amount of people who are on Team Bitcoin, and the best way to do that is to get people through the ETF, because they're going to be on Team Bitcoin. They're going to want Bitcoin to work. Yeah,
I agree. Anyways, we are getting to the top of the hour, Fred. I really enjoyed this conversation. Really took a different turn, and I love when the conversations take a different turn. Love what you're, tweeting out, what you're contributing to the community. It seems like the community is liking it as well. If you had any last message to our audience, what would it be?
Listen, I think the one thing I would say is we're probably going to be on a very big roll for the next couple of years. So I would sort of say just chill right now. Don't try to be too cute. The one thing you don't want to do right now is to try to sell and buy again, because I think that's going to be just a disaster. I think, hodling is by far the best strategy. You should just hold on. But the worst possible thing you could do would be to try to sell with the idea of buying it back cheaper. Don't even think about doing that. When the time's right for you to sell part of your stash, to spend part of your stash, do it. But don't try to time the market, because you're going to fail. And listen, I was a pro trader. I can't time Bitcoin. I have no idea short term what Bitcoin's going to do. Zero. I mean, I think it's going to go up, but did I think it was going to go down 10% at one point yesterday? No. You know what I mean? I don't know. Nobody can predict Bitcoin. It has a mind of its own. So don't try to trade it, and just hold it, get a good position, and just amuse yourself with Bitcoin Twitter and whatever else, and models or whatever else just keeps you happy. Play video games, do whatever you want with your time, but do not sell. That's what I would say. I hope that helps.
No, it 100 million% helps, right? You know, stay humble, stack sats, hodl,
Yeah.
don't try to trade, and that's how you win. Anyways, Fred, thank you so much for coming on the show. Really, really appreciate it. And thank you, and hope to have you back on in a couple months or so. Appreciate it.
Okay, we'll see where we are in 3-4 months. See ya.
Sounds good. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Simply Bitcoin IRL with our guest, Fred Krueger. We'll be back tomorrow with the live show at 12:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for another episode of, whoa, I just hit my mic, of Simply Bitcoin Live. Peace out, everybody.
Today's episode was brought to you by BitcoinWell.com, a Bitcoin-only platform on a mission to enable financial independence.